friends, welcome to Holy Trinity Catholic Church, where we believe, belong, and become. Keeping, saving, living. To keep, to save, to live. Oftentimes, when we consult some people for some advice, for some expert insight, they might say, you have heard from this person, from this organization, you may have heard from this group, you may have gotten that feedback, you may got to know that data. But the person might say, but I say to you, but I say to you. That person who you ask for that kind of feedback speaks genuinely and honestly and with profound conviction says, but I say to you. In today's gospel, Jesus does the same. In interpreting the law to keep, to save, to live. And Jesus says, I say to you. We might be listening to many people, many insights, feedback, data, analysis. When we listen to Jesus, Jesus says, I say to you to keep the law for being saved and to live. The first reading from the book of Sirach says, true wisdom and righteous living will result in happiness, and a life of deprivation and foolishness will result in punishment or misfortune. The emphasis of the wisdom tradition is to gain life. To gain life. The invitation is to embrace wisdom. Embrace wisdom. To keep, to save, and to live. And wisdom leads to the fear of God, the fundamental attitude towards God. The world we live in, the culture we live in, is now being affected with this lack of the fear of God, which leads to the kind of attitude towards sin, a relativism of life. But when engaging true wisdom, we will be led to keep the law, to be saved, and to live. In the second reading, Paul says his own experience of studying and understanding and interpreting the Jewish law, he says Paul develops his own instruction and wisdom. Paul contrasts the wisdom of the world with the wisdom of Christ. He speaks with the wisdom of the age. Then those who mature, Paul says, will extend into the dying and into the rising of Christ. But that comes with a catch. Are we limiting ourselves with the wisdom of the world or the wisdom of Christ, which comes from the fear of God, leading us to keep, to save, and to live? The rulers of this world, Paul says, did not recognize this in Jesus Christ, and they put him to death. And if you don't recognize that in Jesus Christ, the wisdom of God, we will be reckless and we will choose multiple paths that won't keep us, that will not save us, that will not help us live. In the gospel, Jesus says, Amen, I say to you, stresses the truth and validity of his words. Then he says, I say to you, emphasizes the truth and the authority with which he speaks. Jesus uses the formula 4 times. You have heard that it was said in the tradition, in the history, in the wisdom of the world. But he says, but I say to you, to keep the law, to be saved, and to live. Jesus demands, through his emphasis, much more than ritual conformity, external conformity to the law. His demands are radical and challenging. And when we embrace such radical challenges, we will keep, we will save, we will live. This is the radical interpretation of Jesus' law. It would call us to embrace wisdom, not simply with some data, insights, analysis, which are empirical, but to embrace the authentic wisdom of Christ, which comes from the fear of the Lord. The longer we live, we recognize the heavier the choices we make. Jesus says that living of life with the healthy choices will call for true wisdom. True wisdom calls us to choose life and whatever that will enhance life, enhancing life, to keep, to save, and to live. And in doing this, we fulfill the law, not what is simply acceptable, but what is life enhancing. And we recognize that every circumstance in life is different. So, true wisdom of God, which comes from the fear of God, demands that we are fluid and embrace and adapt ourselves to the situations of life. And true wisdom comes to us from the Spirit, who will enrich us with the insight into life. Not just some external empirical data or analysis, but true wisdom comes from the Spirit, which will give us an insight. True wisdom comes to us through the Spirit, which will open new vistas to follow Jesus the Master. Why? To keep the law, to be saved, and to live. But it all demands following the words of Jesus. But I say to you, but I say to you. Father Praveen Lakiseti here at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you. God bless.